If you are interested in the green aspect of that job, what is the greenness you can introduce?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on season 3 of Green Jobs Africa. Yes, the location is different because the season is different. We're doing things a little different this time round. We've been speaking to young people because young people are at the heart of what we do, and today we decided to come to them. We are recording currently from the University of Nairobi during their Green Careers Conference. And I'm excited to have a conversation with someone who is a climate finance and policy expert with over 16 years experience in the climate finance space. And we will hear from her today how she got into this space and why. Most importantly, for our live audience, she is a proud, I should say proud on her behalf, I don't know, she'll tell us, alumni of the University of Nairobi. Welcome, Yvonne Gashugi.
Asante, asante.
Yvonne, first and foremost, how does it feel to be back at the University of Nairobi?
It feels so upgraded. I've not been to this hall. I was in Chiromo campus, so this is such an upgrade, and it's fantastic. I really felt such joy coming back to this campus.
That is true. And I think it's amazing how we were both at the University of Nairobi Chiromo campus, and we met at Chiromo. And just for a bit of backstory, before we get into finding out who Yvonne is now, how did you end up at the University of Nairobi, and what exactly did you study?
So I studied industrial chemistry. It was a course that appealed to me after I passed KCSE and got an A by chance, I have to say, in chemistry. And my dad, who is a PhD, had always said, you have to do the STEM as your first course. You either have to do engineering or science. And so because I had passed chemistry, it kind of called me to do chemistry. To be honest, I didn't like chemistry that much. In fact, when I first entered Form 1, I got a D in chemistry. I couldn't understand this whole language of chemical language. But with determination, I ended up doing really well. And then I heard about money and chemicals. So at the time when I was joining industrial chemistry, I was joining because I wanted to learn how to formulate perfumes and cosmetics because I knew it's $1 billion industry. So I was like, look at that. Kikuyu, chemistry, pesa. So I was very convinced that when I joined industrial chemistry, one, industrial means that I can learn how to produce chemicals at industrial scale, and therefore, I can move into formulation of chemicals that would be used in the cosmetic industry. And yeah, that's how I ended up choosing industrial chemistry. There's no logic to it. I actually wanted to become a marketing person. So I don't know how, life took me that way.
That's interesting because I also, when I was in high school, I also disliked chemistry. So I finished chemistry in Form 4 and I did A levels. I dropped chemistry like a hot potato. So when I joined the university, lo and behold, in my course, I find I have 2 years of university chemistry. Sad days, but we passed. So now you went through the Chiromo process and you finished and graduated. What was like after that? Were you keen to continue working, making perfumes and, getting into the cosmetic industry? And what was your first job? What was your journey like after the university?
My story on my decisions after campus were actually influenced by a decision that I made when in campus. So unlike the day we are in, that time we used to read a lot of magazines, and there used to be a magazine called Drum Magazine. And I was living with my auntie here in Kileleshwa, so I was bored one day and I had this Drum Magazine, and on the cover of Drum Magazine was a lady by the name of Professor Judy Wahungu. I don't know how many of you know her. She used to be Minister of Environment, but at the time she was an executive director of the Africa Center for Technology Studies. This time I was in third year. And I read her story and I was so compelled. The last MC had really good English. I wish I could speak like him, but I was so compelled by her story because for me, I saw my career in her pathway. And so I said, and it's nice to be young. I was so daring. I couldn't imagine that you write to someone an email and they say, no, don't come talk to me. So I read her story, and at the bottom of the story, at the end of the story, they had, for more information, you can get in touch with her, and they put her email there. And so I wrote to her. I've really looked for that email. But then I wrote to her and I told her, look, I find your story very compelling. I really am intrigued by your career. So can I come see you? And Professor Judy, who's not that tall, invited me. And when I went and met her the first time, I was like, wow, she's not that tall. But her story, she felt like a giant because she had been a petroleum engineer. And at the time, I was actually considering to do petroleum as a career path because, again, money. I knew when you finish campus and you worked for Shell or BP or Gulf, you would move into lots of money very early in your career. And so I wrote to her and she invited me. And when I went to see her at the Africa Center of Technology Studies, she sat me down and she gave me benefit of an audience. And she told me, look, you have to think of your career with where you see yourself at your peak and work backwards. And so we did this exercise with her, and she told me, okay, where do you see yourself at the peak? And I said, okay, look, I think I can be really good at this policy thing, and I want to be a minister. For me, it was like at that time, the thing. And so she said, okay, fine. Now let's work backwards on what you need to do. And that's when she told me, go back to campus. There's a club called Young Youth Agency for Development of Science, Technology, and Innovation.
YADSTI.
You remember YADSI? She told me, go join that club. I had never heard of it. And she told me, when you're in that club, you learn so many skills that you will need outside here. And so I listened to her with a lot of faith. I joined the YADSTI. I became the research director, eventually the resource mobilization director. And YADSTI became such a foundational club for me. Like when I see these things like CASE and stuff, I'm like, wow, if you guys can know, these are the clubs that really form your career. And so for me, I joined the YADSTI. And in YADSTI, we were a mix of science and technology students, and we do a lot of resource mobilization to organize functions like this. And it really propelled me to understand climate change because at the time it had started becoming the topic. I think we're moving to Rio plus 20. So she said that I followed blindly, and it became a foundation for me. What did YADSTI do for me? It taught me how to knock on doors to ask for money. It taught me how to bring people together around a common vision. And it also took me for my first flight outside Kenya. And that flight was for UNEP. At the time, it was for Youth for Environment, Africa Youth Environmental Network. I never heard of it. So YADSTI was offered a position to go to Rwanda for this conference, and I happened to be the only one with a passport. Also, I said I have a passport. I didn't have one. But because I was the one who said I have a passport, they said, okay, you go. And that's how I ended up going for Africa Youth. And that then took me to the space of climate change because we would go for these conferences and UNEP would really infuse us with a lot of information about climate change. And so leaving campus, I already knew I wanted to work in climate change. The what, the how, I didn't know. So you asked another question. So then what happened? So after I finished campus in 2010, I became a missionary, a church missionary. I went to plant churches. Stop shaking your head. I was doing the Lord's work. So I became a missionary and I went to Tanzania to do some work. I think I'd call it a gap year. You know, the way you finish campus and you're almost like, I'm not yet ready to get in the workplace. It was a gap year and I finished that, came back to Kenya. And when I came to Kenya, I met my mentor. And my mentor was like, so what do you want to do with your life now? Are you going to continue with this church thing or you're going to do some? So I was like, no, I think I'm ready to work. So he told me, and that was really, I would say it's luck. He just told me, okay, Sawa, I have a friend, they're conducting interviews. Are you ready? Me, I always say yes first. Even when Manda asked me to come here, I didn't check my calendar. I first said yes. So I said yes. And I said, okay, Sawa. Then he told me, yeah, the interview is tomorrow. I've not read anything about this thing. You know how you spend time preparing for an interview? Mm-mm. Me and my KCV, I went to the Ministry of Environment for an interview. The interview was for a program assistant for a UNDP program. I was the last person to be interviewed. And, when you finish an interview and you're like, yeah, I think I did well. I walked from community all the way to where we used to live. And that was I had so much psych because I was sure I had wowed those guys. Wowed with what? Now I look back and I'm like, "La, what did I say? I studied chemistry, I was in University. Like what was the skill I shared? But it was just a confidence that I knew. And that's how I ended up starting my career, working in the Ministry of Environment. And that time it was Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, but in programs for UNDP.
Wow. This is amazing because I feel like I resonate with so much of your journey and it kind of correlates with mine. You were in Yardstey, and when I was in Chiromo, I took up this Chiromo Environmental Awareness Club. And unlike Yardstey, for those of you, how many know Yardstey in here? Is it still alive? But it's mostly a Chiromo club. Yardstey was very well backed financially and had professors. Vis-a-vis Chiromo Environmental Awareness Club, we had zero funding and zero support, but I resonate in the sense of the ability for clubs to expose you to so much more than what you're studying in your 9 to 5 classes. And taking that opportunity can propel you. The second thing I like that you said is being bold to take that first step, saying yes. You do not know what lies behind taking that step, and that's why I was earlier saying the future belongs to the bold. Being able to see somewhere you want to go and say, I'm going there. How? I don't know, but I believe that I will get there. And imagine writing to Dr. Wahungu. I mean, many people, she was a minister, and so thinking she's unreachable. But Bold Nyokabi said, I can. And look where that got you. And I think that's beautiful. So moving from the fact that there was industrial chemistry and now you're in climate change, because a lot of times people feel like they're restricted to a particular career path because of what they studied. Would you say that had any bearing at all? How did you make that switch? Was it easy? Did you feel like you weren't skilled enough? Did you go for upskilling? What was that like?
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, yeah, industrial chemistry, many people went to work in paint industry, cement industry, and I really did work in this industry. Again, the salary was always better. And it was salary at immediate instance. When you move into development world, it's a bit of a longer path. Chemistry is still at the heart of climate change because, as you know, it's greenhouse surface, and that has to be modeled, that informs decision, etc. See, the earlier discussion was on air quality. So chemistry really is a fundamental course in climate change. However, what I went to do was become a program assistant, and at the time it was for it was a program called Africa Adaptation Program. And my first task was on knowledge management. How many of you know what knowledge management is? It's managing knowledge. Not much to it. There's very little chemistry involved in that. And so at some point you ask yourself, am I on track or am I deterred from what I initially thought would be a skill set that I've developed over 4 years in campus, 4 treacherous years in campus, chemistry, calculus up to calculus 6. I'm like, I've done so much math, physics, chemistry, then now I'm coming to crunch numbers on something. but you know what I did and have always been is a positive, I always have had a positive outlook. I'm a believer in there's nothing that is a mistake in your life. And so I took on that role as a knowledge manager assistant. At the time, I was writing a compendium of climate change actors, putting together, it's Red Cross who are doing this, Kenya Space Agency doing this, putting that together into like a dictionary. And I did it with my all. And what that did was it showcased in me, you know, that thing they say in job description requires minimal supervision. You know that thing? Yeah, it showed that I really did need minimal supervision as a skill. But also because I had come from a science background, as with any course, I had very good analytical skills. So I also was able to prove that I'm a big picture person. I understand why we are doing this compendium and blah, blah, blah. As a result, I ended up getting several other jobs right after. And what I have always said is my North Star is that I know what I know. And so I just have to keep adding to that bucket of knowledge because anybody can take anything from you except what you know. So I upskilled. I went for a lot of courses for things that I knew were the sector's future. So for instance, renewable energy courses, which was at the time a very big subject and continues to be. Skills on communicating and raising finances for climate change. So I had and I have continued to build my skill sets because I know in life there's what you know and what you can do. If you prove the two, no one can take those from you. Yeah.
Love it. And just hearing your journey, it's clear that there was the application. Sometimes it's not a direct path where you think it's industrial chemistry, so nothing else. I cannot work in any other sector except this one. But hearing you and being testament myself, that there are skills that you pick up within that course that are applicable in climate change, because the reality is climate change cuts across all sectors. So it's very easy to make that switch if you are determined. And then upskilling, that the gap where you see that I need to be able to get this course, it's not a dead-end road. There's an opportunity to be able to do a course here, do a diploma certification, and be able to get to the qualification that you require. But the truth is, anybody can take up a job in the green economy if you want to. Now, moving into Yvonne now, can we know who Yvonne is now and what Yvonne is handling now?
So now I work at UNDP Kenya. I manage the climate change portfolio. That means I give strategic direction to how we grow that portfolio in terms of activities that we are doing on the ground, in terms of development. Because as you know, UNDP, UN Development Program, is the primary UN agency for development work. And so we really have to look at the balance between how do we advance development outcomes for the country while pursuing our green ambition. So what do I do in my day-to-day? I work in all sectors. Yesterday I was doing forestry. The day before I was doing water. The next day I'll do energy, green skilling. It's UN works in every sector of the economy. Every sector is affected by climate change, so you have to put yourself in the know of what's happening in every sector of the economy. So currently my portfolio, I deal mainly with climate finance, which is mobilizing finance from different sources, especially now private sector, because as you know, there's a lot of changes in what we call development assistance. And then I look at where can that finance go so that it can inject economic activity. So if we think about the current ecosystem you're in, education, are we going to be the same? Are we going to have the same way we educate, or should we have a shift in our education system such that whoever leaves the university is moving into industry and able to advance development outcomes in the economy as quickly as possible. So that's what I do in a day-to-day basis. I write a lot of proposals, and that proposal writing, many people ask, what's that? It's dreaming the future. So I consider myself a dreamer, and being able to put those dreams on paper. And those dreams then have to be so attractive that they can attract finance, meaning that they have to be based on fact and vision of the future. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I call myself the big dreamer of climate change. So I sit in a place, I ask myself, okay, how do we support Tana River change to become more productive? Because that's what you need, productivity. Then I say there's a river. There's agricultural land. So where is the mismatch? Then we think about that. We put that into a proposal. We finance that, and then I oversee those projects as they are conducted.
Awesome. So I want to just say that I feel like you wouldn't probably say this, but I'll say it for you. You're probably at the forefront of ensuring that Africa transitions, has, green transition, and making sure that we develop sustainably, which is sustainable development. And I think that's such a key role you play in the country and in Africa. And may you continue to make an impact that will be felt for generations. That is my prayer and hope for you as you continue in your work, and recognizing the importance of the work that you do. Now, you mentioned the global economy and development assistance that you called it, not handouts. And I think the question now is, with all these new announcements being made, retractions, President Trump, drill, baby drill, what does that mean for a student or a young person hearing that, the future is green, there are a lot of opportunities that are coming for Africans in the green space, but then there's all these, development world with the people with the big pockets retracting and, doing what they want, as it were. Would you say truly that the future is still green? Like the person who's sitting or watching at home saying, can they actually still think that they have a potential career in the green space, or is it a farce?
Yeah, multilateralism is a very complex space. Bringing every country into a collective vision for the globe is something that's not easy to do, and I guess that's why we are going to be having COP30. People are always asking, this climate change, people are always meeting, and these meetings are just to bring consensus on what type of world we need to build. And I think, development outside of harmony with nature is not development at all. Someone will have to pay for it, because nature requires to be protected for it to offer services. And so the sentiments that are being put out there by different countries, they shouldn't cause as much despair for people who are determined to develop. Yeah, it can have it will fracture climate finance in the interim, because the US is one of the largest financier of so many things, including the UN, and it definitely has caused a big dent. However, I look back to countries like Singapore, and there has to be a determination to develop. And I feel like as developing countries, we have a lot in our hands to ask ourselves, how do we develop, but in a manner that is sustainable? And we have not yet scratched the surface on what that looks like. Think about Turkana, or think about, I like using Tana River. Think about Tana River. For those of you, I don't know if you did social studies, GHC, I did GHC. But you remember Tana River had this big irrigation scheme called Bura Irrigation Scheme, and it used to be one of the food hubs of the country. And irrigation right now, what do we say? It's an adaptation system, isn't it? It allows for water to be available for agriculture over time. You're not dependent on weather. Have we scratched the surface on irrigation? Not yet. Have we scratched the surface on energy? Not yet. Have we scratched the surface on, cold storage? Have we scratched the surface on urban mobility, like was being discussed earlier. And I think we have immense opportunities to develop, but to develop in a green pathway. And so I think for Kenya, it's a determination that when we are putting capital to develop, we need to think on how we develop in harmony with nature. And that is where the jobs, as we call them, green jobs, will come from. If you think about the statistics, 1 million people outside of jobs every year in Kenya. That's a large number of people. What do we need to create those jobs? It's industrialization. And to industrialize, we'll have to use our resources. We will have to have good energy sources that do not cause greenhouse gas emissions. We are endowed with all sorts of renewable energy sources. Whether that comes to a price point that makes the product affordable is another question, but that's where innovation comes into play. That's where innovation comes into play. And so I think that for Kenya, green jobs will remain a huge opportunity despite the current discourse when it comes to the US and multilateral funding. Why? Because I think we need food. I think we need cars. I believe people have to move from point A to B. People need shelter. Have we, for instance, explored construction with renewable material, including wood? You know, we've always thought about good housing as housing made with stones, but we can actually have a bio-based construction pathway. And we've seen that happen in countries and economies like Sweden. And what has that done for that economy? They have maintained 70% plus forest cover. So you have to think about a resource in a manner that it's in harmony with nature, it is able to create jobs and jobs at scale. And I think for Kenya then, when you ask whether green jobs will continue to be developed, I don't see how they're stopping. You know, the aid ecosystem is an ecosystem that we have, and the president has said this for a long time. If you think about Red Cross, for instance, it's emergency response, right? We are always reacting. But if we think and flip the script to proactivity, then it means we build industry. We build new pathways for Kenya. We build new pathways for Africa. And Africa has a lot of work to be done. And that, the pathway for me doesn't seem like aid is the reason why we will not be able to move into that.
Totally agreed. It's really being proactive as opposed to reactive. And mentioning the things that Kenya has, Africa has to offer, it has a competitive advantage. And for a long time, it has been, you know, the developed nations dictating the future of climate and the directions we should take. But I really do agree that right now is an opportune time for Africa to chart the way forward, knowing that we have all these resources. How can we take advantage of them? Because a lot of times, the mindset on climate change has been conserve, don't touch. But this is be able to use it sustainably for it to be profitable. And when the money speaks, the bottom line speaks, then the world will listen. And I see that as an opportunity to encourage those who are watching and listening here, that green jobs are really here and they are here to stay and they are the future. So hopefully that, you know, you're convinced enough to be able to see a future for yourself in a green job. And still on green jobs, Yvonne, what would you say from your vantage point are the opportunities you see for young people? Like there's a person sitting here right now probably thinking, I'm graduating in a year, I don't, my future, I'm not sure, you know, the course I studied, it's not marketable or whatever story they might have in their minds. What would you say to them with regards to the opportunities that they can explore in the green economy with regards to green jobs?
That's a good question. I believe that one, whatever you study in school, when you graduate, what do they say? We've given you the power to read. It's actually just the power to read. It's good when you're in a course and it can put you into the market immediately. However, for many people, it may not be. However, in school, you go through a process of training the brain on certain skills that are then used in the workplace. By the way, as a matter of fact, there's no place you will go that they won't train you. As a matter of fact, you will still have to be trained. Whether it's a bank, whether you go into engineering or whatever, they'll still have to train you. So the most important thing that you get is power to read. And when you read, then you move into the marketplace. And the marketplace is about reading opportunities. So that's how I see the power to read. Reading the opportunities. What are the opportunities that are always there? What is the gap? How then can I position myself to fill the gap? I heard someone say once that wealth comes from bridging a knowledge gap. Let me pause for a second for someone to ask themselves what that means. Wealth comes from bridging a knowledge gap. How do we tap into the internet from space? Yeah, that's what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink, isn't it? Without having to do wiring across all over the city. He's just found a way to bridge a knowledge gap. How are we ensuring water moves without pumps? It's a knowledge gap. So I always say, as an individual, myself included, you have to ask yourself, what's the knowledge gap and how can I position myself to bridge that gap? That sounds abstract. Maybe it's out of reach. But let me bring it down a bit. When you leave university, when you leave campus, the critical thing is to ask yourself, what skills have I learned and where do I want to apply them? Because remember, it's about where you will feel most fulfilled. Yeah? So you're an engineer, you've done mechanical engineering. Do you want to participate in buildings? Do you want to participate in industry? Do you want to participate wherever? And then ask yourself, if you are interested in the green aspect of that job, what is the greenness you can introduce? Yeah? It's shift in resource efficiency, it's shift in process efficiency, etc. Then you want to ask yourself, how can I package myself so that I can be useful there, either as an employee or as an entrepreneur? I believe a lot of us have to be thinking about entrepreneurship. Why? You work, and if you've worked for many years like myself, you start to realize that you're not really churning out your own ideas. Yes, you work and you know you're building an industry or whatever, but then you realize you're not learning the skill of building. And I think Africa, that's what we really need. People who know how to build something from the ground up. Why? Because there's a resource, and we have to be able to add value to the resource and then sell it for a profit. But I understand entrepreneurship has its own challenges. So I would say that for anyone who's leaving university, position yourself like Dr. Wahungu told me, where do you want to go at your peak? Work backwards, identify the industry, then pay attention to the trends in that industry. Yeah? So if you're in, for instance, the transport sector, ask yourself, what is now the current trend? Is it EVs? What are EVs looking like? We are moving into, what do they call them? Driverless cars, isn't it? How are we positioning ourselves? Are we positioning ourselves to be the driver in a driverless world? Or are we positioning ourselves to draw and design the driverless cars? Yeah, so we have to think ourselves in the future with the AI world, with the technology advanced world. Are we building Africa to go into that space and becoming relevant even into that space? Or are we staying here where we are looking for jobs making paint in a factory that will probably be done by a Tesla robot in a few years? Yeah. I don't know if I'm making sense, but you have to really be futuristic in your thinking, and then ask yourself, what skill am I getting or coming out with that is packaged for that futuristic world? And then ask yourself, then which organizations then are moving in that space? Can I work with them? Can I add value to them by providing a service or a good that will be useful to their processes? Yeah.
Yvonne, I feel like you're reading my mind, because as you're talking, I'm thinking green entrepreneurship, and then you mention it. And then I'm thinking innovation, AI, technology, then you mention it. And I think I just want to, double down on that point, that truly regardless of whether you actually studied business in the university or not. The truth is, any single one of us here can innovate, coming up with a solution, coming up with a problem. Elon is just one, but I believe there are many Elons within this African continent, especially towards solving for the issue of climate change. And mine is to just encourage green entrepreneurs who are in this room and they may not know it, that you can actually come up with an AI solution for climate change, a technological tool or solution for solving for the issue of climate change and helping Africa, make that transition, the green transition or the energy transition. And so just to speak a little more about green entrepreneurship, if there's people in this room or watching that, they've probably been toying with an idea, where do you start with a green enterprise, a green business? Where do I go? If I'm a young person here, where do I go? How do I start? Where are the places to connect to? And I'll just plug Jacob's Ladder Africa here. We run an incubation program. We take young people through a 9-month program where you get skills and you're able to stand and run your business by the time you're done with the program. But that's just one of them. I'd like to hear, because you're in the world, what opportunities that these young people can connect to as green entrepreneurs.